The kitchen smelled like rosemary and garlic, Claire's signature roast chicken, the kind her husband David always raved about at dinner parties. The dining table was already set with her mother's porcelain. Candles flickered gently in there. Brass holders and a soft Ella Fitzgerald record crackled through the speakers. It was their 30th wedding anniversary. Claire wiped her hands on the linen towel, checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, and smiled. There were more lines around her eyes now. Her hair had gone mostly silver, but tonight she felt radiant, grateful, grounded. She picked up David's phone from the sideboard. He'd left it there on his way to the shower. It lit up as she reached to place it on the charger. A message blinked onto the screen. Sarah, you and that navy blue suit. I can still feel your hand on my back from this morning. Same time tomorrow? Claire froze. Her thumb hovered, trembling, and tapped the screen open. The thread of texts unspooled like a nightmare. Jokes she didn't understand. Hotel reservations, casual cruelties. Words like, she doesn't see it coming and she's so dull these days. Sarah. Her best friend since they were 16. She stood there for a full minute, unmoving, heart hammering like 1,000 tiny fists in her chest. Then she pressed the phone to her chest, like maybe she could absorb it, or maybe quiet the scream that wanted to rip through her. In the bathroom, David sang softly behind the shower curtain. Claire blinked, turned off the oven, and walked upstairs. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she opened her old linen closet and pulled out the long-forgotten canvas bag marked Claire, Art School. It smelled like dust and time and something else. Like possibility. She carried it back down to the living room and placed it on the table, right next to the roast chicken. The candles had gone out. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table in her robe, sipping lukewarm tea and staring at the bag of old art supplies, as if it might explain what had just happened. At some point, around 4 a.m., she picked up a sketch pad. The pages were yellowed, corners curled with age. Her fingers hesitated, then moved instinctively, charcoal gliding across paper. She didn't know what she was drawing until the lines formed the unmistakable silhouette of a woman sitting alone at a dinner table, her face turned away, her hands folded in her lap like surrender. She tore the page out and crumpled it. When the sun rose, Claire cooked breakfast. David came down the stairs, freshly shaved, humming. He wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed her on the cheek like nothing had happened, like he wasn't carrying another woman's perfume in the collar of his shirt. "You didn't sleep, did you?" he asked. Claire turned and looked at him. Really looked. "No," she said. "I had a lot on my mind." He nodded absently and reached for the coffee. "Big day ahead. Can't be late. Don't forget we have that dinner with the Morrises Friday." She watched him leave with his travel mug and briefcase like it was any other Thursday. As the door shut behind him, Claire opened her laptop and typed into the search bar, "Art classes for adults near me." She didn't know what she was looking for. Maybe escape. Maybe herself. That afternoon, she called in sick to her volunteer shift at the library, pulled on jeans that hadn't seen daylight in years, and drove across town to a quiet art studio above a flower shop. The walls were covered in paint-splattered canvas, the scent of turpentine sharp, but not unpleasant. A woman with copper hair and paint-streaked fingers looked up. "You here for the beginner's class?" Claire nodded. "I'm not really a beginner, just out of practice," the woman smiled. "Aren't we all?" Claire took a seat by the window, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was waiting for her life to happen. She was reaching for it, slowly, with trembling fingers, but reaching still. The weeks that followed felt like a slow exhale Claire hadn't realized she'd been holding for years. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she returned to the studio above the flower shop. The drive itself became a ritual, passing the bakery with the crooked sign, turning left at the park where children laughed without a care. It was a world she hadn't paid attention to in years, a world that hadn't noticed she'd disappeared. At first, her hands trembled. Her lines were messy, colors muddled. But then, something shifted. One evening, she painted a portrait of a woman staring at her own reflection. The woman didn't look like Claire. She looked stronger, more certain, and just a little bit defiant. When the instructor walked by and paused to study it, she said softly, "This is someone learning to reclaim her name." Claire blinked back tears. Not because she was sad, but because she felt seen. At home, things were quiet. David still went through the motions, his briefcase by the door, his tie draped on the kitchen chair, his smile perfectly timed. But Claire had stopped asking where he was going. She no longer tried to decode the glances between him and Sarah during dinner parties. Something inside her had settled, not forgiven, not forgotten, just stepped aside. One afternoon, after class, Claire found herself in a cozy cafe downtown. She sat near the window with her sketchbook, drawing strangers as they passed. She captured a mother with a sleeping baby, a man in a wrinkled suit carrying 2 bags of groceries, a teenage girl dancing while waiting for her bus. Life. Beautiful in its ordinariness. An older woman at the next table leaned over. "You draw people the way I imagine their hearts feel," she said. Claire smiled. "I'm just starting over." The woman nodded. "That's the bravest thing anyone can do." And in that moment, Claire realized she was no longer surviving. The betrayal. She was evolving because of it. The pain hadn't broken her. It had awakened her. Claire's world, once defined by schedules, silence, and someone else's comfort, began to expand, quietly, deliberately. She rented a small art studio above a florist's shop, just a 15-minute walk from home. It wasn't fancy, just white walls, a wooden table, and a single north-facing window. But it was hers. She pinned her early sketches to the wall. Some were tender, some angry. A few were raw enough that she had to look away after finishing them. But she didn't take them down. She let them stay, like old bruises fading at their own pace. One morning, Sarah showed up at her door unannounced. Claire had just made tea and was sorting through color palettes. She didn't answer right away, just stared at the woman who had once braided her hair before dances and held her hand through childbirth stories. "I miss you," Sarah said softly, clutching the sleeves of her sweater like they could hide her shame. Claire stepped aside and let her in, but not with the same warmth as before. She poured the tea, listened, nodded. But this time she didn't rush to make Sarah comfortable. She let the silence sit between them like an uninvited guest. Sarah talked about how things with David hadn't turned out the way she expected. "We thought we were chasing something real, but maybe it was just an escape." Claire blinked, calm. "From what?" Sarah hesitated. "From ourselves, I guess." Claire didn't offer comfort. Instead, she simply said, "I hope you figure that out." After Sarah left, Claire locked the door, leaned against it, and let the moment wash over her. No tears, just a soft sense of release. like setting down a heavy suitcase she'd carried far too long. That night, she took out a new canvas. She painted a woman walking through fire, but her face was steady, her steps deliberate. It wasn't a portrait of pain. It was a portrait of power, and it looked a lot like Claire. Claire stood in the gallery doorway, heart pounding, hands slightly trembling, but her spine straight as a line of light. The small neighborhood exhibit space smelled faintly of varnish and fresh lilies. Her name, Claire Matthews, was printed in soft gold lettering on the wall behind her. She hadn't seen her name alone like that in years, untethered from Mrs. or +1. It looked right. People trickled in. Friends from her art class, a few curious neighbors, and even her old librarian, who recognized Claire not by face but by the poetry books she used to borrow. Each canvas told a chapter, grief without words, the ache of watching someone unchoose you, the weight of silence, and then the rising. A series near the back wall showed a woman stepping out of shadows, barefoot and resolute, toward a window full of light. One of the visitors, a woman with silver curls and a cane, stood quietly in front of that last painting. She turned to Claire, eyes glassy. "It's like you painted my spine," she whispered, "like you remembered what it felt like to stand again." Claire smiled. That's exactly what it was. Later that night, long after the last thank you and the final hug, Claire sat alone on the gallery bench, barefoot, her shoes kicked off beside her. The room was quiet now, except for the hum of the heater and the soft creak of the walls settling. And she felt it, not pride, not even joy, but something deeper, something steadier, a sense of being full without anyone else having to pour into her. She reached into her bag, pulled out her old journal, and wrote one sentence under that day's date. "I no longer live to be chosen. I live to choose." 3 months later, Claire was living in a small, sun-drenched apartment above a bookstore. The windows overlooked a park where children played and golden retrievers chased tennis balls. It wasn't the biggest space or the fanciest, but it was hers. Every corner of her new home whispered freedom. There was a canvas propped up against the wall in every room, paintbrushes soaking in mason jars on the kitchen counter, and post-it notes full of poetry fragments taped to the fridge. Claire's laughter echoed off the walls, mingling with the jazz records she played late into the night. She danced sometimes, alone, barefoot, just because she could. One Saturday morning, she stood in front of the mirror, getting ready for her first date in over 30 years. Her hands didn't shake. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wore her favorite linen dress, not because it was flattering, but because it felt like her. She smiled at her reflection, a quiet, knowing smile. She wasn't looking to be saved. She wasn't even looking to be swept off her feet. She had already done the hardest thing. She had come home to herself. Later that day, she met Daniel at the local art museum. He was kind, soft-spoken, a bit clumsy with his coffee, and genuinely curious about her work. They wandered through the exhibits like old friends, not rushing, not pretending, just being. As they paused in front of a painting, one of a woman, in a red coat standing in a blizzard, her face turned defiantly toward the wind, Daniel turned to her and said, "She reminds me of you." Claire didn't blush. She didn't shrink. She simply nodded. "She reminds me of me too." And for the first time in a long time, Claire didn't feel like a chapter someone had closed. She felt like a whole book, still being written, by her own hand. 6 months after her world had collapsed, Claire stood in the middle of a bustling art gallery. Her gallery. People milled about, holding glasses of white wine and murmuring words like honest, raw, and powerful as they gazed at her work. Each canvas told a different part of her story: betrayal, heartbreak, solitude, and then color, rebirth, joy. Near the back wall hung the centerpiece of the exhibition, a large painting titled "Reclaiming Me." It showed a woman walking barefoot into the sea at dawn, her dress billowing behind her like wings. The water shimmered with every hue of possibility. As Claire stood quietly, observing from the corner, someone touched her shoulder. It was her daughter, Ella, home from grad school just for this. Her eyes were glassy with pride. "Mom," she whispered. "You're amazing," Claire smiled softly, her throat tightening. For so long she'd worried about how the divorce had affected Ella, but now she saw it. Her daughter didn't see a broken woman. She saw someone who had chosen herself, against all odds. Later that evening, after the crowd had gone and the lights dimmed, Claire returned to the gallery alone. She stood before Reclaiming Me, letting the silence wrap around her like a warm coat. It was then that she realized this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of the one she was finally writing for herself. Tomorrow she'd start sketching again. Tomorrow she'd wake up with the sun and go for a walk by the lake. Tomorrow she might call Daniel, or she might not, because she had learned that healing wasn't always loud or fast or made for public display. Sometimes it was just one quiet decision after another, to keep choosing herself. And that, Claire thought, was the most radical kind of love there was. A year to the day since she had discovered the betrayal, Claire stood on the balcony of her new apartment, watching the city breathe beneath her. The sun was rising, casting soft gold across the rooftops, and she was holding a cup of coffee, black just the way she liked it, the same way she used to make it for David, before realizing he hadn't known her preferences in years. Now, everything was different. Her hair, once dyed to match David's favorite honey blonde, had grown out in its natural silver streaks. Her body, softer and stronger at once, no longer fit into the roles she used to force it into. Perfect wife, forgiving friend, silent supporter. And her soul. It was quieter now, but unshakable. Claire's days were full, not always busy, but full. Her art studio, just a block away, had become a sanctuary not just for herself but for other women who wandered in during community workshops she offered on Saturday mornings. Some of them were freshly divorced, some widowed, some just lost. But all of them found something in Claire's presence. Not answers, but courage. That morning she opened her inbox to find an email from Sarah. The subject line read, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I owe you this." Claire didn't open it right away. She didn't need to. The forgiveness Sarah was asking for had already happened, in a way. Not for Sarah's sake, but for Claire's own. She had chosen not to carry the weight of resentment any longer. She'd set it down months ago, along with the old version of herself. Instead, Claire closed her laptop, walked barefoot into her studio, and stood before a blank canvas. Today's painting wouldn't be about heartbreak. It wouldn't be about loss. It would be about the view from the balcony at sunrise, the steam rising from a cup of coffee, the silver in her hair, and the steady pulse of a woman who had reclaimed herself completely. Because sometimes the biggest revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's peaceful. It's waking up one day and realizing you don't think about them anymore. And instead of being an invisible wife, Claire had become the kind of woman people couldn't take their eyes off. She'd painted her way back into existence, on her terms, in her time, for no one but herself. Sometimes it takes being broken wide open to finally see who we are, not as someone's wife, someone's friend, or someone's afterthought, but as a whole, powerful woman who deserves joy, respect, and the freedom to choose her own path. Claire didn't just walk away from betrayal. She walked toward herself, toward light, toward a life where her voice is no longer silenced by guilt, and her worth no longer measured by loyalty to those who never earned. If you've ever found yourself starting over when the world thought you should stay down, know this: your comeback doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be yours. Thank you for spending this time with Claire's story. If it stirred something in your heart, let us know. And if you're walking your own road to reclaiming who you are not alone. Not here. We have more stories, waiting. Stories of strength, healing, and women who rise. So hit subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow. Something beautiful is coming.